know that Jesus Christ was a holy rule breaker? In fact, the Bible shows that he was a serial rule breaker. So much so that the religious fundamentalists of his time wanted to kill him for it. Of course, Jesus didn't break the rules just for the sake of breaking the rules. He did it for a very important reason. And that is because sometimes in life, many times in life, love calls us to break the rules for the sake of our neighbor. In the Gospel according to Mark, the writer describes a time when Jesus encountered a group of teachers, religious teachers from his time. They were from a fundamentalist sect called the Pharisees. And in this encounter, we see a dialogue between Jesus and the religious teachers. And in this dialogue, Jesus teaches them, the teachers, a very important principle about why sometimes in life love calls us to break the rules. One day on the Jewish day of rest, which is called the Sabbath, Jesus and his students were walking through some grain fields, and they were hungry. So the students started picking some of the grain and eating it. The Pharisees saw what they were doing and said to Jesus, "Look, why are they doing what's unlawful on the day of rest?" Yes, these religious teachers accused Jesus of breaking the rules. And they were right. There is a rule in the Old Testament against harvesting on the day of rest. What was Jesus' response to their question? Well, he didn't deny that they were breaking religious law. Instead, he taught the teachers why his friends were doing this. Mark writes that he answered them, "Have you never read what King David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? He entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for the priests to eat. He also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, 'The day of rest was made for people, not people for the day of rest.'" Jesus taught them that the rules are made for the sake of people, not people for the sake of the rules. And sometimes in life, the right thing to do is to break the rules for the sake of other people, for the sake of our neighbor. All the Gospels show that Jesus Christ repeatedly broke the teachings of Holy Scripture, and this made the religious fundamentalists of his time very angry. Why? Because they had got it backwards. They started putting the cart in front of the horse and thinking that people are made for the rules. And when someone starts to think this way, not surprisingly, what happens? They start to care about the rules more than people. The Pharisees focused on the letter of the law instead of the spirit of the law or the reason for the teachings, their purpose. And when this happens, when we start to care more about the rules than people, it causes all kinds of unnecessary damage. This time Jesus was in a synagogue, which is a Jewish church, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Mark writes, some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Why? There was a religious rule that people should not do any work on the day of rest, including healing work. How did Jesus respond to this? Mark writes that he said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Then Jesus asked them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" In other words, what's the purpose of the day of rest? Is it to help people or harm them? Mark writes that the people in the synagogue remained silent. They didn't answer. He says that Jesus looked around at them in anger, deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. And he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. He was healed. And what was the reaction of the religious teachers to this miraculous healing? Mark writes that then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. And this, of course, begs the question, why did these fundamentalists want to kill somebody who had just healed a guy's hand? And the answer is the same. They had begun to love the rules more than people. Without knowing it, they had made the rules into a false god or an idol. And they were filled with a murderous hatred for Jesus when he challenged their idol. One time a Pharisee asked Jesus, "What's the most important commandment in the scriptures?" And Jesus told him there's two of them. The first is to love God with all our strength, our heart, our soul, our mind, and our body. And the second, he said, is like it. To love our neighbor as ourselves, like ourselves. And then he said something very telling. He told the Pharisee that all of the commandments, all of the teachings, all of the prophets and the law hang upon these two commandments, the love of God and the love of our neighbor. I remember many moons ago when I was a young fundamentalist, a friend and I were talking to a guy from a super-duper uber fundamentalist church, and he was telling us about a woman in his church who was being abused by her husband. I can't remember if it was physical abuse or emotional abuse or both of these things. But the woman had asked the church leaders, is it okay if I divorce this guy? My life is a living hell with this guy. And the church leaders had told the woman, no, you can't divorce her. Because the teachings of Jesus Christ are that unless a husband or a wife commit adultery, there can be no divorce. Does that sound familiar? Does that not sound like the Pharisees in Mark, in the incidents we had just looked at, who cared more about the rules than people? I never did hear back what happened to this poor woman. I hope she escaped that abusive church. Jesus, the holy rule breaker, showed us that sometimes love calls us to break the rules for the sake of our neighbor. And this is the good, pleasing, and holy will of God.